Welcome to the Inboundr Podcast. I'm here today with Martijn, who's got 12 years experience in consulting and training companies on employee advocacy, social selling. He's worked with some crazy brands like Nestlé, Mercedes-Benz, Panasonic, and Siemens. And today we'll jump into his strategies for scaling employee advocacy and his tips on social selling.
I think it was research from LinkedIn in 2023 that 35 to 40% of the visitors of your profile actually check out what you have posted before they start to engage with you. Sales is the backbone of good content because they are talking to your customers, depending of course how large your organization is, but those are the people that are really deep down, they're deep down in the industry. They exactly, they talk to your customers, they talk to your leads, they talk to people in the industry. So what I think is really important for sales is to help them capture all of those ideas, capture all of those insights. What I always teach in our social selling courses is that
Hey everyone, welcome to the Inboundr Podcast. I'm here today with Martijn, who's got 12 years experience in consulting and training companies on employee advocacy, social selling. He's worked with some crazy brands like Nestlé, Mercedes-Benz, Panasonic, and Siemens. And today we'll jump into his strategies for scaling employee advocacy and his tips on social selling. So Martijn, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for your invite, Sean. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here in your podcast. Really looking forward.
So I guess to jump in, maybe we can start with a bit of your background story, your personal content journey. I guess you've seen the evolution of employee advocacy in B2B. So what led you to get started on this 12 years ago? How did that journey start? And when did employee advocacy and social selling become a top priority for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually remember when I was doing something completely different. I was doing professional bartending with cocktails and stuff like that. Really fun, but a really tough job. Lots of hours, long days. And I actually vividly remember this because I went to a workshop where a guy talked about LinkedIn. And I had no idea what LinkedIn was, and he talked about Twitter. Back then it was called Twitter, and it was talking about all this social media stuff, and I was like, this is pretty interesting. And I always wanted to start my own business. And I remember sitting in the car like, what am I doing? Like, this is the moment, Like, if you're an entrepreneur, you might recognize it's like you sort of have an epiphany, like this is it. So I quit my job and I started being a social media consultant. And it's so funny when I look back at it right now, it's like I didn't know anything, but I knew a little bit more than other people. And the reason why I was so interested in social media back then is because it democratized media. So before social media, you needed to have huge budgets for television, radio, print, and so on. And now everybody could have his own voice. So of course, many things for good and for bad have changed in the last years. But it was always like people can experience their thoughts or share their thoughts and show their expertise and all the kind of cool stuff on social media. And that's actually still what drives me. Now, when you look at employee advocacy, I think that's actually something that many people forget, because what I see happening with many employee advocacy programs, and not because people, or maybe it is, but not because people don't want to, but many just think of employee advocacy as, well, you're sort of the parrot, I always say, from the marketing department, and you just have to post everything the marketing department says. And there is a place and time for that. You should, as a marketing department, help your people and create content. We got a model for that. But I think also that employee advocacy is really important when you want to do it right, to let everybody have their own voice.
Yeah, it seems from a lot of our research that in the early days, around 2010, a lot of employee advocacy was just based on having the marketing team create content and then getting the rest of the employee base to just simply reshare it across all platforms. But it seems like it's starting to evolve more, where employees are starting to create their own content that's not even tied to really what the marketing team's putting out. Especially a lot of the C-suite and senior level employees are really creating what they believe. They're sharing their own perspectives, their own experiences, far much more than just simply pushing out a lot of the company content. Can you walk us through what your strategy has looked like and how you've helped brands launch their employee advocacy programs? And I guess I'm curious too how that's evolved from when you first got started to how you would lead that today and the advice that you would share today.
Pretty soon when I started my own company, I started working with Just Connecting. It's a company from Richard van der Blom. He's pretty famous on the internet, especially on LinkedIn. So we started working together, and actually that's what we do since that time. So I'm Richard's business partner. within just connecting. So that's where we help all of our like top name clients. I remember that when we started, it was just giving people training about how to optimize their profile. So it was just a bunch of us sitting in the classroom with your laptops open, like, let's improve your headline, let's put blah, 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 blah. I think it was around 5 years ago, something like that, we started like thinking, okay, so, and there's a place and time for that, but what can we do better? Richard came up with a model which we call our employee advocacy pyramid, where we say around 60% of your employees, they do want to help, but they have other priorities. So they don't have time, or they don't have interest, or whatever it is. So they're motivated, they want to help out, but not that much. So these people, you should have them optimize their profile for themselves and also for the company, brand awareness, and just tell them like, hey, we posted something new, or your colleague posted something new. If you want to, if you think it's interesting, just hit like. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
So basically you could say that's 60% of your company. Then you got another 20 to 30, which we call engagement advocates. And those are the people that actually start to comment on posts. And when you look at LinkedIn, one of the best things you can do is to comment on posts. It's helping your own brand, it's helping your own reach, but also it's one of the highest ranked metrics within the algorithm.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of value-based, not great posts, Sean, not those kinds of comments, but value-based comments, those are highly ranked in the algorithm, which will increase your reach. So you got a lot of people saying, I want to go a step further, like, sure, but let me comment a little bit more. Then you got your brand ambassadors. Those are the people that actually create content. For everybody listening, I am all for guidelines. You have to help people, like, hey, what should you and what shouldn't you post? I'm not for restrictions. I'm not saying like you cannot post this or you cannot post that, but you can, of course, share best practices and make people aware, like, hey, it's a business platform, so pay attention to that. Brand ambassadors create their own content. These are the people that you can help with. They have a cool idea, but you as a department, marketing department or social media manager, you help them create a carousel, for example, or you record a video for them. And then you have, that's actually the top, your thought leaders. And many people think like, oh, so that's C-level. No, it doesn't have to be. It could also be like a product engineer that is really, really interested and wants to share his or her expertise. So it doesn't have to be C-level, but it have to be people that have really in-depth knowledge. And we call them your thought leaders. So those are like the typical, most companies, they only have, depending on the company, of course, 5, maybe 10, that's it. Like huge companies. But these are the people that will really make sure that you make an impact in the industry. So we start, back to your question, we start by helping companies identify who are these people and where are they. Because if you start with telling everybody, you have to create videos, you have to create articles, you have to create newsletters, you have to create LinkedIn posts or any other social media, you have to do this and this and this, 100% guarantee is going to fail. So figuring out where everybody is, what you can expect from them, what price they are willing to pay, and what they get back, of course, that's where we start.
Yeah, it's interesting. And going back to those stats that you mentioned too, we found recently, I think it was the Harris poll that did a study on the willingness of employees to create content. And they found that 3% on average are currently already creating content, and 72% would create content if they were supported with the right tools, guidelines, strategies, all of that sort of stuff. And when you talked about breaking it down into a pyramid, you're looking at this like the execs and the senior level employees at the top, the mid-level down to the entry level and junior employees. How does that strategy change when you're working with a whole team? Of course, the execs, the CEOs, they can post that thought leadership content. They have the experience and the credibility to do that. But when you're helping junior and entry-level employees and mid-market or mid-level employees, what does the content strategy look like at this stage of their career?
Well, actually, you could be a thought leader and not be C-level. You could be a CEO and just be an engagement advocate.
Okay.
Could be the case. It really depends on, I always like to call the price that you have to pay. So, for example, if you're a CEO or you're a C-level and you understand that this is important, but you have so much going on. You think like, okay, at this moment in time, it's impossible for me to do this. And I am all for helping people out. I am not for telling the office manager that they need to host their LinkedIn account, send messages on their behalf and post. I'm not for that. You can get all the help that you want, but you have to invest in it for yourself too. I more look at it from a perspective, not so much as where are you in the organization, but what type of person are are you? Do you actually have expertise? Now, when it comes to entry level, if you're young, depending on the business, but if you're young, probably you don't have that much experience, not that much knowledge. So it doesn't make sense to make you a thought leader, again, depending on where you are in your career. But that's how we look at it. So back to your question, if you look at the strategies for like a little bit lower in the pyramid, so the engagement advocates, the potential promoters, I always recommend everybody should have a solid LinkedIn profile. And it doesn't have to be like super comprehensive with everything and every little detail on it. But you should have a good profile picture, you should have a good header image, you should have a good headline, an about section, a little bit of experience, and if anything possible, some recommendations. Anybody in the company should have that.
Makes sense.
Because what most companies forget is that people do research. People look in their network like it's almost too much to explain like in this podcast. It's like so huge. There are so many radars going on. But I think it's a really good idea to make sure that everybody in the company has at least a solid LinkedIn profile. Now, depending where you are in that pyramid, you have to take further steps. So creating a LinkedIn newsletter doesn't make sense if you are just a potential promoter. But it does make sense when you're a thought leader.
Right.
When you're a thought leader, you cannot get away with 2 likes a month. Then you're not a thought leader. So it's more like that I look at it.
Right.
Than from a seniority perspective.
With also the background in social selling, when you look at the sales team specifically, if a business owner was to come to you and ask, how can we empower our sales team to create content? What does your advice sort of look like on empowering them to create content, and what sort of content should a sales team be creating?
Sales is the backbone of good content because they are talking to your customers, depending, of course, how large your organization is. But those are the people that are really deep down in, what would you say? Like, this is the Dutch kind of thingy. Like they're deep down in the industry. And they exactly, they talk to your customers, they talk to your leads, they talk to people in the industry. So what I think is really important for sales is to help them capture all of those ideas, capture all of those insights. I know somebody that created a pretty cool tool around that. Maybe you know him as well. Actually, I'm talking to him. But so tools that you have created, those are really helpful because I'm a little bit the same. I always use this in my training. I call it the blinking cursor syndrome. So you go to LinkedIn and it says, what do you want to talk about? Like, good question, LinkedIn. Actually, I have no idea. So you never want to start from a blank slate. When it comes to sales, so we got a process for this, of course, but when it comes to content, these are actually the people that you want to have their ideas, and you have to make sure that you give them the tools and the strategies to make that as simple as possible. In my experience, they are not the people who create articles and videos and all that kind of stuff, but you need to extract their knowledge. So like, okay, let me then write an article for you. Is this what you're talking about? Yes, that's what I mean. Okay, cool. There you go, let's publish it. So especially for sales, because they're really busy and most of them are not really keen on spending a lot of time on creating content, but they are like the best content creators when it comes to ideas, and they just need a little bit of help of structuring those ideas and put them into consumable content.
Like, I mean, for one, your sales calls are a great source of content, right? All of those customer questions that are getting asked in the call. I mean, it goes back to what teachers said to us growing up. If one person has a question, it's likely that someone else does too, right? So creating content off of those questions is usually a great way to go. Going and researching all of this too from when we got started, we found that when sales reps are actively creating content and also doing outreach on LinkedIn, every time I get a cold call on LinkedIn, I go and I look at who's the profile who just reached out to me. Right. And so if you go to their profile and you see that they've got some previous content that's relevant to whatever pain points that you're facing, the increase in likelihood that they're going to book that demo certainly sees a significant boost. So I think it's really impactful for them to address that specifically. And it kind of goes back to my question about in terms of how high up you are on the company hierarchy in terms of junior employee up to executive. A lot of SDRs today, they're quite young. From our experience, I don't necessarily would advise an SDR to hop in with thought leadership content, but certainly posting about the experiences that they're having on a day-to-day with customers. Just met with so-and-so, they asked me this. Here's a company we just met with, they're experiencing these problems, here's how I help them solve it. That's great content for sales reps to post, and that will definitely increase their demo booking when it goes to cold outbound.
What I always teach in our social selling courses is that like content is your backbone. So it used to be like good old sales is you would go door to door, call people, and like that time is gone. I don't know about you, but I think you just mentioned it. Like the cold emails that I get on LinkedIn, it's like a plague, it's like spam. Especially when you have a look at the profiles. I think it was research from LinkedIn in 2023 that might not have the numbers really correct, but it was around this statistic. 35 to 40% of the visitors of your profile actually check out what you have posted before they start to engage with you. So if you send them a connection request or an email like, hey, can we talk? Which you shouldn't do. You should first build a relationship, but that's another story. But let's say you send me a connection request. I'm like, hey, who's this guy, Sean? I go to your profile. You have to have a good profile picture, all that kind of stuff. But 40% of people actually do a deep dive into your content. Now, if your last post was Merry Christmas, everybody, from 2012, or it's like buy our stuff, buy our stuff, buy our stuff, you are 100% sure that nobody will accept your connection request, or at least it's a bad start. I think for every sales rep is post at least once a week something that is valuable for the people you want to reach out for. So it's not sales, it's not like buy our stuff, but it's like, hey, this is a trend in the market that we see. What do you think about it? Or hey, we got our trend report and these are the 10 best things you should be aware of. It should be valuable. And sure, you can mix it up with some sales content, say like, hey, we got really an awesome product or service, and if you want a demo, please feel free to let us know. But consultative selling, if you don't do consultative selling now, sure, depending a little bit on the industry, but if you don't do consultative selling now, I think within 5 years you're done.
Yeah, I agree. Recently I came across stats from 2015 to today. It was something along the lines of in 2015 you could send 100 cold emails and you would book a demo. Fast forward to 2020, you send 200 emails, you book one demo. Fast forward to today, you're sending 300 emails to book one demo, right? So it's consistently falling year over year. I think the reason it's falling is because for over a decade, company or sales reps were all chasing customers outside of ICP. And so a lot of the people who receive cold calls today are uncertain that this person actually understands their problems and can therefore sell it. And so I do think that you get over that hump when you prove on your content that you do understand the problem that this ICP that you've reached out to is facing. Now, I guess in terms of a broader approach to employee advocacy, of course, we both know that it's a very powerful tool. There's plenty of companies who are thriving because of it, all the way up from early stage startups to massive Fortune 500s, but there's still a lot of internal resistance. I guess my question is, how do you help companies overcome that skepticism about employee generated content when they're not fully bought into the idea? Would you say that there's recurring obstacles to getting that buy-in? Is it a matter of aligning content creation with an ROI, or is it more of a lack of understanding about the potential impact?
Well, I think you got two objections, or broadly speaking, two levels. One is, are the decision makers and C-level, are they in for employee advocacy? Because when you look at older structured companies, let's call them that, or specific industries where, for example, if you're in health, you cannot just post things about your product. That's like, you cannot do that. So there are some certain regulations, of course, that we need to pay attention to. But I know for sure that if you don't have a buy-in from C-level, like the management, and if you think, well, employee advocacy, let's give it a try, but here are the restrictions, then it's doomed to fail. So yes, you should have guidelines. Yes, all of those things, legal, sure, 100%. Make sure you're in line with that. But you have to be aware that you cannot control anything like all the time. So I think that the first objection is that, like, if you don't have that buy-in, if everybody's like, we're not 100% sure, it's doomed to fail. So if you're trying to implement a employee advocacy program and the CEO doesn't like it, it's never going to work. Now, when you have that buy-in, let's say management thinking, yeah, this is actually a good idea, and sure, within the guidelines, within the restrictions that we have, but everybody can do this thing. And you run into the next obstacle, which is people like, why should I spend my time creating content and so on? And I think it's really important for companies, but especially for people, to understand that when you build a solid personal brand, and it doesn't have to be like with a fancy logo and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to be a super influencer, but when you start to build a brand around your expertise, about the things that you're passionate about, and also contributing to the success of the company, that's massively going to improve your career. So unless you want to retire within 3 years, I would say it's a really good idea to build that personal brand. So companies need to be aware that they have to lift some restrictions and let people do their thing. And people need to understand that, hey, I'm not a corporate parrot. I'm building my personal brand, but sure, I also have to take into consideration the company that I work for and well, let's help each other out. So it has to be a win-win on both sides. But those are the biggest obstacles that I see. So first, management buy-in, let's call it that. And then second, how to convince people. And both have their details in that, but broadly speaking, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's kind of funny because to me, the win-win is so obvious. The company's getting more brand awareness and the employees getting that exposure, sharing their expertise. There's like kind of a side note, we've had universities reaching out to us for Inboundr so that they can empower some of their students to be creating LinkedIn content. They see that as a way to land employment. So it's really obvious to us when we're in it, but interesting that it's far less obvious to those who are not so wrapped up in this sort of industry, I guess you could say. My next question for you is, let's say you get all of the buy-in from the C-suite and you've got the buy-in from the employees, and now they've deployed this strategy, they're actively creating content. If they come to you and they say, why isn't our content generating the level of engagement that we expected? How do you go about troubleshooting that problem?
Well, I would first start with what do we actually want to achieve. So I always start with goals. This is why we have to pyramid, because you first have to decide, like, where do you want to be? I want to be a thought leader. Well, good for you, but that means you have to spend 8 hours a week creating content.
Yeah.
No, if is that something you want? No, that's not what I want. Okay, sure. Let's start with being an ambassador. So first of all, you have to be really clear, like, what's the goal? When it comes to engagement, that is why you first want to start with the goal. Because what do we mean by great engagement? What do you want to improve? Like, do you want more likes? Do you want more comments? Do you want more reposts? And don't get me wrong, Sean, I'm all for lots of likes, comments, engagement, and all that kind of stuff. But let's be honest, you can buy that if you want to. You can use engagement bots, you can buy likes. It's also the best way to get kicked off LinkedIn. So side note here, never do that. But you can trick the system. It's not that hard. It's for LinkedIn. It's illegal, but it's not that hard. So I always go back, like, what's actually the success rate that we want? Because if you get 5 likes and 3 comments from your colleagues, and you think like, well, this post was and now a lead calls you and says, hey, I saw your post, fire, and that's actually what we're looking for. When can we meet up for a sales call? Like, who cares about how many likes you got? Now, sure, there's the algorithm, the more engagement you get, the farther reach. So there is a place and time for that. I do understand that. But it is really important that when you start this journey as a company, but also as an individual employee, like, what do you actually want? For sales reps, for example, they are always like, how do I get more engagement? It's not about engagement. You can get more engagement by using some fancy hook or whatever you want. But that's not the engagement that you want. You want engagement from your leads or your sales or your clients. So let's figure out how to build a relationship with those people. And if they like your post, good. But funny thing that's just crossing my mind, we call this the silent majority. And it's about 80%, maybe even more. 80% of people see your post, read your post, click on the link, like, this is really interesting stuff. Maybe even save it, send it to their colleagues, and don't engage.
Right.
They don't like, they might not be even connected with you. One of our biggest clients actually followed Richard for over a year. She did nothing with his content. She only looked at it. And then after a year, she has never liked a post. And then after a year, she called like, hey, we got a social selling issue here. Can you help us out? It was one of our biggest clients. She never engaged.
Wow.
After that, she engaged. So I'm always be very aware of what you want to get. And if your goal is to go viral on LinkedIn and be a linfluencer, as I like to call it, yeah, sure. Then you have to pay attention to how many likes, comments, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if you follow Alex Hermosi, but recently they did a test run with Alex's content to create more broadly applicable content, funny content, mixing in a couple of memes, stuff that doesn't directly relate to the businesses that he offers. And they found that it got way more impressions, way more engagement, and way less leads. And so, of course, they've pivoted back to the more specific, more niche, more narrow content that doesn't get the impressions, it doesn't get the likes and the comments, but it does get the business. I think it's like probably the number one common misconception when people first get started with creating content. They're shooting for that engagement, that virality, but that's not the content that's necessarily going to get you those leads. And Adam Robinson's another good example. He mixed in meme content for a while, saw the likes shoot up, all of his posts getting over 1,000 likes, but far less results when it actually comes to the business, because they're not gaining a following from people within their ICP. They're gaining a following from people who are broadly applicable to that funny content that they had posted.
Maybe someone's listening like, hey, yeah, but when you get a lot of people engaging with your content, then people start to follow you and then they will see your next. 100% true. I always get this question at the start of my training. I always start like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about LinkedIn? And some people are like, it's turning into Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, why is it turning into Facebook? Like, people are posting all that kind of personal stuff. It's like, sure, some things, well, you shouldn't even post on Facebook. You should keep that for yourself, but that's another story. What I explain to them is like, sure, LinkedIn is a business event, but nobody said like, you cannot post that content. What you achieve by sometimes posting something personal is, first of all, you make sure that your audience also makes an emotional connection to you. It's the same in sales, you know? When you and I have some interesting comment and I want to sell you something, but we're both crazy about, I don't know, road cycling, and we talk about road cycling for half an hour before we actually start to talk about products, everybody understands like, hey, then you got a real connection. So same on LinkedIn. When you post some stuff that goes quote unquote viral, it's funny, it's personal, and the good thing is that your next post will also gain more reach on LinkedIn, because if you post a lot of things that get no response, your reach goes down. If you post a lot of things that get a lot of response, your reach goes up. The thing is that you want to be aware of the combination of it. So sometimes you want to post something that actually goes viral, and then sometimes you want to post something that actually contributes to the sale. Why not? But you have to find a really good balance in that. That's, for example, what I would say is one of the rules of marketing and communication within employee advocacy, to help people like, hey, you know, what kind of posts should you create? That's why I'm not a big fan of just posting like the corporate content only. And sure, you can post some corporate content, 100%. Let's do it. It's also easy, but it shouldn't be like the end game.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, even when you look at a lot of known ghostwriters, their advice is to incorporate that personal level content weekly into the content strategy, because like you mentioned, if you meet someone with a common hobby, it can be a great way to build that connection when you actually do get the chance to speak to them. But it sounds like, I guess, to kind of wrap up that whole point, the real metric of success here is generating leads from your employee advocacy campaigns. Now, I think we kind of talked about it before we did this, but attribution is definitely the Achilles heel of a lot of and many marketing strategies. So is there anything unique that you'll do to try to attribute leads back to content that's been working for you?
It can be really hard to say like that post has created 5 leads, depending, of course, what you do. You can work with UTM links and all that kind of stuff, but most people understand it. So sure, you can do something with that. What I recommend is also to have a look at the beginning when you start a employee advocacy program. What are the things that we want to measure? And then start to measure that right now. Like, what's the baseline? Where are we at right now? How much traffic do we get from LinkedIn? How many, especially our key players, our ambassadors or our salespeople or our thought leaders, like how many connections do they have right now? How much people do they reach? On average, how much comments do they get? On average, how many leads do we actually now score via LinkedIn? Like people like connecting like, hey, we want to buy stuff. So you should have a benchmark on that. You should have what's our base. And then I think it's a good idea to pay attention to those numbers and also track them. Now, I have to be honest, sometimes LinkedIn makes that a bit hard, because if you want to, for example, know what your average reach was on LinkedIn for the last half year, well, good luck. It's a lot of work. So you need some tools for that, which isn't a problem. But those are some things, some metrics that I would start measuring. Saying like, hey, all right, so our employee advocacy program has brought our 5 clients, which generated blah, 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 blah. That's always harder to do, because the problem is, but that's always the case with branding. Like if Nike puts out a billboard, how many shoes do they sell because of that billboard? So we all know that it will be more, but how many exact shoes, like when did you choose to buy the Nike shoe? Was it because of the billboard that you remember, oh yeah, I need new shoes, you drove to the store and then you bought them? Or, was it something else? So that's why it's sometimes hard to show people like the exact metric, but broadly speaking, sure, 100% you can measure a lot. And if you see that visitors going up from social media since you have implemented your employee advocacy program, and those visitors have converted into clients, well, there you got your metrics.
Yeah, so I guess then would your key piece of advice before starting be to look at your Google Analytics, see how much traffic you're currently driving from LinkedIn to your website, comparing it every quarter to see if that's been boosted, and then just the typical attribution form like, hey, how did you hear about us? And then monitoring how many times people are selecting LinkedIn. Would those be the two key pieces that you're looking at?
Yeah, and especially that's a really important one, especially if you want to make it more concrete for lead generation, for sales. One thing you could do is ask all of your salespeople, like, all right, this is your ICP. Okay, cool. Please go to LinkedIn, fill in your ICP, like in your advanced search, or if you use Sales Navigator, even better. And just figure out how many people do you actually have in your network that are your ICP. Doesn't really matter if they're a client right now, but they are your ICP. All right, so let's say it's like 100. All right, cool. Now, let's start creating better content. Let's start engage with those people, like do your whole thing that we do on our social selling training. And then after a month, let's have a look at how many you have right now. And how many of those have you converted into your funnel? Yeah. And then after 2 months, you do the same. Then you make it really concrete. So you got your marketing objectives, Google Analytics, all that kind of stuff, like brand awareness, 100%. But you can make it really, really concrete, especially when you're in sales. But you have to have a sales force because of that, of course. But who's your ICP? It is hard to track, Sean, but you could even go as far as who has liked my post and who has engaged with my post, and are these people my ICP? But getting back to my story earlier about Richard, having somebody that watched their content, because especially salespeople, they ask me this question, like, but none of my leads respond. Sure. Yeah. What would happen if they respond? Yeah, I would give them a call. And people know that. So your content is really interesting. They won't engage. And that's not a reason to stop with producing content, but you have to be aware of that silent majority. Yeah.
I guess kind of getting back to a little bit of the content strategy. When you look at ghostwriters, they're going to really build out like a 2-month long, I guess call it campaign. And they're going to have, here's the topic for Monday, here's the topic for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so forth. And they're going to have this all planned out over the next 8 weeks. With employee advocacy, are you also looking to hit the really specific content types, content topics to go out on each day of the week over that period of time too?
Maybe not specifically, like on Tuesday we do this, on Wednesday we do this. You could, because it makes it really structured for yourself, but it's more for yourself than for the market, because people sometimes say, like, people are waiting for your post. Nobody's waiting for your post. Yeah. I can guarantee you nobody's waiting for your post. But like, it's not, it's Wednesday, Sean is going to post about, nobody does that. Yeah. But sure, for your own structure, perfect, if that works for you, fine. Getting back to your question, yes, for employee advocacy, 100%. I would say everybody that's a little bit higher than the engagement advocate, like everybody that actually wants to create some content, 100% choose preferably one topic, but that can be really hard. But max 3 topics that you want to be known for. And you have to start with that. Yeah. So you have to think, okay, what do I want to achieve on LinkedIn? If it's sales, it's really obvious, but if you're just project manager or whatever you do, and it's not like that specific, then still, okay, who do I want to attract? And what do I actually want to share? What are my expertise? What do I want to be recognized on? And based on that, you're going to optimize your profile. Based on that, you're going to collect information that's relevant for you. Based on that, you're going to get those snippets out of calls and whatever you do. Based on that, you're going to create content. Preferably one big thing, but max 3 topics, that's about it.
Makes sense. I think employee advocacy, the term was coined 20 years ago, right? Probably longer. But as of late, it's become much more of a hot topic. Employee-led marketing, employee-generated content, employee advocacy, personal brand, founder brand, build in public, right? All of this stuff around social media is becoming much more talked about than it once was. And so naturally, with more people creating content, if someone were to come to you and ask, how can I differentiate myself with my content, especially over the next few years as it gets more saturated, what would your advice be there?
Make it personal. And that's the key thing. We all have a challenge here because AI brings us so much good stuff, but also brings us challenges. Because if the bar for creating content is getting lower and lower and lower, it also means that people start to create more content. Now, I am 100% convinced that platforms will also adapt to this. I really buy into the latest book of Gary Vaynerchuk, where he talks about the TikTokification of social media, saying like, hey, it used to be the social graph. We are connected on LinkedIn, so I see your posts. Well, that's not the case anymore. I see posts that are interesting for me. So I think that's going to be a big change. I see it already happening on LinkedIn, not as much as I see on TikTok, but you see it happening on LinkedIn. So I think when it comes to content creation, 100% use AI and all the great stuff that's out there, but always make sure that before you hit publish that you think, okay, is this actually something, if we would meet for drinking a beer in a bar, is this actually what I would talk about? Is this actually what I would say? Is this actually my perspective? Which brings us also back to good employee advocacy. That's why you cannot have like the corporate messages, because people spot that from like miles away. And it's not, I really hate that word, but it's not authentic. So the more authentic you are, the better it is. That's something that will make you stand out, because many people will just hit, ChatGPT or whatever they have, or use your great tool, and actually you say it as well, like, okay, you got your insights, but now you need to create your own version out of it. No, that's too much work. Copy, paste, go.
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
Yeah, I agree. Curious about your prediction for the future. Of course, you've got 12 years experience leading employee advocacy, social selling. As we sort of touched on, it's become much more of a hot topic the last couple of years with the way the traditional playbook, cold outbound, all that stuff is starting to see its decline. Do you have any sort of hot takes or polarizing opinions on how employee advocacy might look in 2030 and how it's all going to evolve?
I'm not sure who this quote is from, but I always like it's really old already. It's a digital world, act human. I think we go two ways. One is the people that really know how to leverage AI. So they can make unique content using AI, like not the broad, like write me a post and then just dump it. Yeah. We can spot that. But people that really understand how to use it in a really, really smart way for scaling content, but also to make it more personalized. For example, when you visit my website, you get a completely different website because of your characteristics than somebody else. Like those kind of things, I know it's already happening, but that will get much further. I hope that we would get back much more to the more personal approach. So instead of me responding to ads, if you take it a few years down the line, even the content that people are producing on all these social media accounts, I won't take it for granted. So I won't always, quote unquote, believe it. But if you say, Sean, like, all right, so you need a new website. I know this guy, he's really good. So the references from real people that we know and trust, I think that's going to be even more important as well.
Yeah.
That's why I love LinkedIn, because it's built on creating real relationships. What I always tell people, especially with sales training, I never made any money from LinkedIn. They're always like, well, what you do already training like 12 years. Nobody's ever sent me a connection request saying, hey, you can send the invoice to... Nobody ever did. I use LinkedIn to find those people. I use LinkedIn to build a relationship, or at least to engage with those people, to find out more, to build a relationship as far as that can go online. And then we meet, and then we have lots of things to talk about instead of we meet and we actually like, who are you and what can we do for each other? So that's what I think is going to happen in the future. People are going to mess up AI, big time. People are going to use it in a really smart way. And then we have those people that really understand we have to build a human relationship, because that's the only thing that AI will never be able to, well, at least I hope, to copy.
Makes sense. I'm not sure if you follow Alex Lieberman. He's the founder of Morning Brew, which is a sort of a media publication.
Yeah, the newsletter, right?
It was about a year ago now, but he posted that he was talking to one of the largest CEOs in the world, didn't name drop who that was, but mentioned that they were all in on personal brand training, every employee from the intern up to the CEO, and creating content. And his prediction for the future was that in 5 years from now, he believes every B2B company on the planet will be training their entire team to create content. Also, the other week, LinkedIn put out an article from the LinkedIn team with their prediction on the future of in-office influencers and in-office creators, and pushing everyone to kind of have their own really personal audience and therefore distribution, which is, it's interesting if the world will really move that way.
That's why I solely believe, or really believe in our pyramid, because there will be people that like, I don't want to do this for many different reasons. One of the things that I do emphasize on, and this is actually from Daniel Priestley, interesting guy from the UK, and he wrote a book called Key Person of Influence. He said something that really resonated with me. He says, an influencer says, look at me, like look at my lifestyle, look at whatever I do. Some people love it, but a lot of people that I meet are like, I don't want to do all that kind of stuff. So, okay. He says, but a key person of influence says, look at that. And I really like that differentiation. Like, I get a lot of resistance when people think like, oh, so I have to be an influencer. Well, you can, but that's not what this training is about. Sorry, I cannot help you. I have no idea. But if you want to be a key person of influence, it's like, it's not about me, but it's about that. Like, have a look at that. That's really interesting. I really resonate with that. I really think that's an interesting one. So if you look at it from that perspective, I hope this CEO will get it right.
Yeah, I guess to finish off the podcast, we've spoken a lot about how to get started with employee advocacy, why you should do it, why it's beneficial. To take the opposite, if a company were to come to you and ask you, should we start an employee advocacy campaign? Would there be any reasons where you would say, no, I don't think that you should do that?
Company culture would be a big one. Going back to like, if you don't have a management buy-in, C-suite buy-in, it's not going to work. If you have a company that has not so much of a good company culture, then it doesn't make sense to do it. Maybe with some people, but especially not for the whole company, because nobody wants to promote a company that they actually don't really like. So if that would be the case, fortunately, I never had that situation going, but if that would be the case, it would be a no-go. I would say, no, first, do your restructure first. If companies are restructuring or downsizing, have to fire people, is definitely not the moment to employ an employee advocacy program. Although there's a lot of solutions for that. But maybe some industries. Could be that we have a big chip manufacturer here in the Netherlands called ASML. Mm-hmm. It's a big one. I can imagine that they are not really keen on sharing all of their insights. Although I see some ideas and solutions for them, because they're always looking for new talent. So there is a way for that, but maybe not like for the whole company as, let's say, Google, I don't know, where everybody just can share, well, not top secret things, but they can share a lot of stuff and try new stuff and all the kind of stuff. Those companies are helped a lot more with employee advocacy program than those other ones. Right. So restructuring, not a good company culture at this moment. It's a no-go, and specific industries depending on specific situations.
And so with all of the companies that you've helped in the past, have you noticed any trends that certain industries do great with employee advocacies while others struggle? Not because there isn't buy-in, there is buy-in, but just because of the industry that they're in, you've noticed that it really hasn't worked.
Generally speaking, it works for business to business. So business to consumer, also I have to be 100% honest, people don't call us when they have a business to consumer company, because we're solely focused on LinkedIn. If you're going to ask, I don't even have a TikTok account, I cannot tell you anything about that. So business to consumer, I don't know that much about. So employee advocacy for me works with business to business, especially with businesses or sales processes that need a lot of knowledge, where the buyer needs a lot of knowledge before they can make the buying decision. If you would sell pencils, I can be super creative. I can think of great employee advocacy program for a company that sells pencils, but it's harder to do that than, for example, a company like yours, where you have like all cool stuff that you can talk about in the industry and how you have a solution and all things that are going on. So that's something I see works better. Yeah. Okay. And size. That's also a thing.
What about when you put it into the perspective of their ACV? Companies who have an higher ACV versus companies that have a lower ACV. A service that's $20 a month versus a service that's going to be $2,000, $10,000 a month. Would you see more of an emphasis needs to go onto employee advocacy at the higher ACV compared to the lower ACV, or really no difference?
I would say the higher ACV is more interesting. Depending on how many people do you want to reach, is it recurring? Because if 100,000 people sign up because of your employee advocacy for a $20 program every month, might be interesting. But generally speaking, higher ACV,
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, that is all the questions I had for you. Anything that I didn't ask that maybe I should have?
Oh, yeah, we can talk about it. Hey, let me ask a question to you. What do you see as the biggest struggle when it comes to employees that know they have done all the thing? They upgraded their profile, all the cool stuff. They have thought of topics, guidelines are in place. Everybody's really happy and excited. But now I'm like, what should I talk about? What I always recommend is go to Google, type in your keywords, look for people also asked. Go to Perplexity, go on LinkedIn, find some interesting posts, save them and so on, but maybe I can learn something from you. Anything you suggest people can do there?
Yeah, I think content fatigue is definitely a big issue. A lot of people, maybe they can hit the ground running, they've got a few ideas, but then they get into month 2 of creating content and they're like, well, what do I talk about? For us, I mean, we're biased, but I used to be a ghostwriter, and a great source of content there was pulling from meeting transcripts. Customers ask all kinds of questions on calls. I think pulling from your customer support tickets too, who are using the service, that's another gold mine. Customer onboarding calls is another gold mine. I think a lot of interesting ideas come from internal team meetings as well. I think a lot of the interesting content ideas sit within the conversations that everyone on the team is having on a day-to-day, whether they're internal or they're external facing calls. I think another great one too, at least in my opinion, when you look at great LinkedIn content, it's quite similar to great journalism. It's usually really well researched. It's usually really timely, with what's occurring and what's new and what's being released in the media or talked about in the media. So I think setting up some sort of research notification as well. You've got, here's my content pillars. If you're able to continuously research what's new and relevant in the news that ties into your content pillars, I think you'll be able to pull from more external sources there too. It's hard to really start from scratch. So we try to look for some sort of inspiration. Usually it's in your conversations and usually it's in what's trending online.
It's actually a really good one with the news. I don't do that right now. Not sure if I'm going to set it up right now because it's evening already, but the dog still needs to get out. But that's a really good one. I'm going to implement that tomorrow.
Yeah, it's something that we're playing around with automating too. I think it's a great, there's a lot of tools out there. You don't even need Inboundr to do this. There's lots of great ones out there where they will build you a custom feed every day. Feedly is one of them. They'll build you a custom feed every day of news that's relevant to certain keywords. So there's a lot of great ways where you can set all that up.
It's a good idea. I'm going to implement that in my content training. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Cool, man.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Martijn, for hopping on the podcast. Really appreciate it, and we should do it again sometime soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Again, it was a real pleasure, and I hope your audience liked it. I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for it.
Yeah, of course.